It is known as the Protestant Reformation. The religious movement within Christianity started in the 16th century by a German monk, Martin Luther. His tenets produced a great schism in the Catholic Church, which gave rise to numerous churches that we today group under the denomination of Protestantism. It was a major event that would forever change the history of Europe. So, who was Martin Luther? Luther was an Augustinian Catholic monk who was so shocked by the embarrassing spectacle of the Sale of Indulgences by the Catholic Church that he nailed 95 theses to the Wittenberg Church as a critique. It was a direct challenge to the power of Rome. This happened in 1517, and some doubt that this courageous gesture happened exactly as we have been told. Nevertheless, what was important was the content of the complaint. The 95 Theses, which we would now call a pamphlet, were a series of propositions in the form of a complaint, with the purpose of reforming a somewhat murky aspect of the Church at that time. But what was that about the Sale of Indulgences? The doctrine of indulgences was a well-established concept in the lives of Catholics at the time, and one that brought benefits to the Church. Without wishing to offend anyone, we're going to explain it in a really basic way. Let's see. All humans are sinners, and whoever is free from sin should cast the first stone. However, we can purge our sins through penance, that is, the confession and atonement of those sins. Penance is one of the 7 Catholic sacraments. All that was fine, but not all sins managed to be purged in a lifetime. And for that, Catholics invented purgatory. A space, well, it's not a physical space, but a transient state between the world of the living and the kingdom of heaven. In other words, before entering heaven, your soul had to spend a very long time purging all those sins, like a kind of washing tunnel to decontaminate you before St. Peter opened the heavenly gates for you. The issue of purgatory must have been of great concern to the Catholic devotees of the time. The goal was heaven, but the thought of spending 30 or 40 years stuck in limbo must have been quite distressing. However, there was a solution. Buy indulgences. That is, in exchange for an amount of money and a series of sacrifices, the Church of Rome gave you a document accrediting a reduction of years in purgatory, the perfect gift for deceased relatives who were having such a boring time in limbo. But you could also buy atonement for future sins for yourself. These sales, or rather, indulgence trafficking, was very common in Europe at the time. In the 1500s, the Pope was in need of money, and the construction of the Great St. Peter's Basilica was taking place. The indulgences were the perfect means for raising cash, a very profitable product. Low production costs, as they were nothing more than a piece of paper with a stamp for which a lot of money was paid. The cost was based on the days, months, or years you wanted to subtract from purgatory. Luther's 95 Theses strongly criticized the Sale of Indulgences. In 1519, after the Leipzig debate, Luther declared one key element that would end up being one of the great pillars of Protestantism: the Sola Scriptura. The German monk advocated getting back to fundamentals. Anything that was not in the Holy Scriptures could not be interpreted at will. The Bible was directly inspired by God. Therefore, for Luther, it was the only source of authority. This was a rather dangerous declaration as, for example, purgatory does not appear in either the Old or the New Testament. Luther had uncovered one of the Church's disgraces and was therefore an inconvenience, which was not a great concern, for heresy was nothing new within the Church. Still, in 1521, the Pope of Rome published the bull Decet Romanum Pontificum, excommunicating Luther. Even that same year, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V called him to order, but nothing worked. There was no way to get him on their side. For Catholics, Luther was a heretic, a criminal, so the reading and possession of his writings was forbidden. All this did was give more publicity to the German monk. The battle was on, and Luther managed propaganda very well. Another German, Johannes Gutenberg, had invented the printing press a few years earlier. The printing press was the great ally in the spreading of Luther's ideas, which brought the Catholic Church to its knees. Luther's words would tour Europe, and other answering voices emerged. Zwinglio, Calvin, even the English monarch Henry VIII would take advantage of the situation to separate Rome and create his own church, the Anglican Church. After the Diet of Worms, the agents of a German prince, Frederick of Saxony, captured Luther and gave him refuge in Wartburg Castle. They wanted to protect him. During these years, Luther would translate the Bible into German and develop his reformist doctrine. This episode is key because it was very important for the German prince to have Luther on his side. Luther was a much-needed and coveted tool to trigger that confrontation between the German oligarchies and the Catholic emperor. Some German princes did not believe in the European and Christian project of Emperor Charles V, not because it was not a good idea, but because it could jeopardize their balance of power. Luther's material, with his religious confrontation, was a perfect catalyst to ignite the flame of a bloody war. And so it was done. The board was shaken, and everyone scrambled to get into position. Any excuse is good for starting a war, and this time, the excuse was religion. The Catholic Church was broken, and German unification was entrenched. And as countries at war in Europe progressed towards the centralized modern state, Germany broke apart into different local powers by anomalously lengthening the feudal system. After a series of wars, the confrontation between Luther and Emperor Charles V can be said to have been won by Luther. In 1555, the Peace of Augsburg was signed. The Empire of Charles V was divided into two Christian denominations, Lutherans and Catholics. German princes could now choose the faith to profess within their own states. The subjects of each prince were obliged to profess the religion that each one chose. This, of course, was far from the supposed religious freedom. Religious intolerance within Protestant states was a fact, and as Professor Elvira Roca-Beret says, and we have anticipated before, it is not true that Protestantism brought progress, quite the opposite. The Holy Empire was anchored in the Middle Ages until the 19th century. But what was the reaction of the Catholic Church after Luther's Protestant Reformation? The reaction was what became known as the Catholic Counter-Reformation. But we'll tell you about that in another video.